Please welcome Brian.
As sort of a hobby, every year or so for the last 5 years, I read a book about Buddhism. How many of you are interested in Buddhism or have read some books before? Well, pick the right audience. Well, of course, I don't know if you've had the same experience, but when I read these books, in the first 10 pages, I have this huge insight. It just really changes my perspective of life. And pretty soon, as I get through the rest of the book, I forget about that first big insight that I had. It kind of washes away. It's sort of like the 80-20. That 80% was the first 10 pages. So I always like to pick up the books and go back and learn that insight. And of course, there's no better way to really hammer home the insight than through a personal life experience. So today I'm going to talk to you about a marathon that I ran that really hammered home this certain lesson, central lesson in Buddhism. Now, I'm sure we have a couple marathon runners here. Of course, it's Toastmasters. We have a bunch of overachievers. But I want you to think about your own marathon. As we go through and talk about inspiration, and I hear about writing books or camping with the Boy Scouts or being at Toastmasters for 10 years, each of you has your own marathon. And your activities make me sweat when I hear about how long it takes to publish a book or to go through your own activity. So think about this lesson in context of your own experience. So a few years ago, I was on my third marathon. The first marathon I ran, I had some energy left by the end. I was worried to go out too fast, so by the end I felt pretty good. The second one, I started out slow, and by the end I was running fast again, and I felt great. By the third one, I was curious to see what would happen if I just pushed it right from the beginning. What could I do? Marathons are kind of funny because you only get a few chances to see what can happen. So my plan was to go out strong from the start. This was the Boston Marathon. Most people think of the Boston Marathon as uphill. It's actually downhill for almost all of it to start with. And then there's a 1 mile hill they call Heartbreak Hill at mile 20 to 21 that a lot of people struggle with. And then it's downhill again from there. It's hard to train for in the Chicago winter along the lakefront. So I had this plan going in. And here's the first central lesson of Buddhism, is that we all have the right to happiness. That's a right that we have as humans, as all living beings actually. And running makes me happy because it's a form of basically meditation. It's so boring that once you get up there, you start thinking about nothing. Now, as I'm going through this marathon, I'm starting out strong. I'm in mile 3, I'm feeling great. Pass by my family at mile 6, I say hi. They said later, "You looked amazing." And I felt amazing. My plan was going perfectly. Now, by the time I got to about mile 18 or 19, I'm starting to feel a little tired, but still I'm moving along just fine. And at mile 20 and a half, I'm halfway through Heartbreak Hill, and I just hit the wall. Now, if you've ever done anything like this and you understand what hitting the wall feels like, your body just says it's done. It's like it's set up a hotline when you call in for customer services. We appreciate how important your call is. You know, if you just hold for a little bit, we'll get back to you. That's what your legs are saying. And you're trying to move, but it's like moving through gel. Brings me to the second central lesson of Buddhism, which is that pain in life is inevitable. It sounds kind of depressing, right? That pain is an inevitable part of life. But it's a very important thing to understand. And the Buddha, while he was meditating, started to realize this. And sometimes I think to myself, when I go through something, I experience pain, and I look back and I say, well, what else did I expect? This is part of life. Going through life without having pain is sort of like trying to take a shower without getting wet. It's just an inevitable part of life. And we go through such lengths nowadays to not have pain that sometimes I think that any sort of pain is such a surprise to us, because we go from our air-conditioned car into our workplace, and all of a sudden we're dealing with death. But that's just a part of life. So I'm going through and I'm struggling, and I'm realizing that this was not how I planned things to go. And it wasn't about 30 seconds later till I came up to the third lesson, central lesson of Buddhism, which is that suffering is optional. And this is the silver lining to the whole pain part. Pain is something that comes to us from the outside, but suffering is something that we choose on our own. We can choose to suffer, or we can choose to not suffer. And it's our reaction to that pain that we choose. At that point, I started laughing. I realized how ridiculous it was that I had made this plan to go out as fast as I could on this marathon that was all downhill to start and then went uphill for the rest of it. It was a horrible plan. And I trained in Chicago in the winter. It was just all set up wrong. So while I'm going through, my body's in pain, but I was laughing the whole time. I started to walk, people were passing me by. It's like, oh man, this is not the way I pictured it. So I did cross the finish line much, much later. And it brings me to the last central lesson of Buddhism, that if you can accept that pain is a part of life and that suffering is optional, you can be happy. And I was exhausted, but I felt happy. I felt good that I accomplished the goal. So next time you're going through your own marathon, your book writing, or your Toastmasters, realize that pain is an inevitable part of the process, but how you react to that pain is your own choice, and you can choose to be happy.